started here in just a second. Let me make sure it's connected before we get ahead of ourselves.
Are we on TikTok or just YouTube?
We're just on YouTube right now, and it looks like stream is connected, so we're good to go there. So,
Awesome.
friends, welcome in for our special event today. I have my good friend Chet with me, and we're going to be going over like I don't want to say like a hidden biblical idea because it's not all that hidden if you studied the ancient Near East, but it's definitely one of those topics where not a lot of Bible readers in the modern era are gonna find these references. We're referring to the trial by water, or the also known as the river ordeal. And it's a really neat concept. Most people who have studied the Hebrew Bible, like Chet, and luckily, like myself, have come into contact with literature to provide such descriptions so we can find these things. But so we're really excited to cover this topic because, like, Chet, did you ever hear anyone ever in a Bible study or like a church sermon even reference the ordeal by water?
No, absolutely not. This was purely academic investigation. In fact, before, as we were preparing for this, I just kind of did some Google searches to see, like what's out there on it. And for, public consumption, there's really not a lot that, you really have to dig into the academic stuff to know much of the nuances of discussion about the river ordeal.
That is the case, and we'll get into some of the obvious passages. Like once you guys know what the river ordeal is, we'll as we're talking, you're already going to start connecting passages, those that are avid listeners of the channel and avid Bible readers, but we're going to hopefully fill in a bunch of gaps as well. Now, we are going to be answering questions at the end, as these typically go. If you have questions at the end, you can super chat them during the live stream. We're not going to read them during the stream, but at the end of the stream, if you send any questions in, Chet and I will answer to the best of our abilities, and hopefully no one will walk away with any lingering questions, or at least no major lingering questions. Sometimes the questions are so good that we have to like go do research and come back later and give you give you the answer. But those are
Yeah,
the
if
fun
we can't
questions.
answer your question, you might just get a whole podcast episode. So
That certainly might be the case.
don't be too sad.
Okay, well, with that, let's get into it because the river ordeal is a lot of fun. But we start like we typically should, which is like defining terms. So the river ordeal is a kind of hidden gem, hidden theme in the Hebrew Bible. But what is it? So it's an ancient Near Eastern trait whereby a legal trial or divine judgment was placed upon an accused person's guilt or innocence was determined by exposure to a sacred river, often by being thrown in or submerged into it. The idea was that the river god would vindicate the innocent who survived and or floated, and condemn the guilty who drowned. There's a little bit of debate among the literature and scholars, like whether or not the guilty died in the river, or whether or not they just survived but were maybe worse for wear, you might say. Not quite like the Monty Python witches float situation, but not too far from it either. Me personally, I suspect a lot of times that the river ordeal came up, the guilty party died. That's just my particular reading. But if you know anything about the ancient Near East, you know that these rituals differ from culture to culture. So in one culture, it might have been, well, if you died, you were guilty. In another culture, it might be a little more diverse. So that being said,
Well,
here
I'll
are.
just insert
Mhm.
something real quick because the river ordeal was used to determine a lot of different kinds of cases too. So it could be a case by case deal, right? Where if you
Yeah,
sink, maybe just sinking and drowning would be the punishment. Whereas in other cases, it's like, well, no, get the person out of the water, and then we can, determine what the verdict is going to be. So that may have been a factor as well.
so that does bring up a good point because it seems like these were, the word public might be the right way to phrase it. These were public
Yes.
events, right? So it certainly is possible that, for example, you've brought up already the tablets for Mari that describe the river ordeal during a land dispute. It certainly would be the case that if that's how they were typically performed, if a person was in fact at the edge of death, it would have been presumed that they were guilty and they would have pulled them out. or they could have pulled them out. You don't have to let them die in the river.
Right, right. And in fact, we have a text where a person is thrown into the is participating in the ordeal, and um, the people who are initiating this ritual are they can't find him, and they kind of freak out, and he ends up coming up, and I think he's dead by the time they find him. But it goes to show that I mean that maybe doesn't necessarily mean that he wasn't supposed to die, but it certainly means he wasn't supposed to get lost, and so that's so a piece of data.
Yeah. I would say this, there is a really interesting connection with the river ordeal to death, which we'll get into when we'll
Yes.
look at some of the sources. And that's why I think it's hard to determine sometimes if they were meant to die or not. It might be culture to culture. But we're going to
Right.
get into some of the sources. I did 8 sources. I limited it to 8 sources because I didn't want to be too redundant. The first and maybe most famous source for the river ordeal comes from the Law Code of Hammurabi, about 1800s, 1700s BCE. Most people know this as the Babylonian law codes that the Bible tends to mirror a little bit in the book of Exodus and elsewhere. But in Hammurabi Law Code number 2 says if a signor, this is like a high-ranking person in society, like so both in the Hammurabi Law Code and the Hittite Law Code, you'll find that there are individuals of higher status that get special treatment. But it says if a signor brought a charge of sorcery against another signor, but has not provided it, the one against whom the charge of sorcery was brought upon going to the river shall throw himself into the river, and if the river has been if the river has then overpowered him, his accuser shall take over his estate. If the river has shown that the signor to be innocent, and he has accordingly come forth safe, the one who brought the charge of sorcery against him shall be put to death. This is interesting because the one who brought the charge, who didn't dive in the river, is going to get murdered if, in fact, he's falsely accusing him. It says, while the one who threw
Right.
himself in the river shall take over the estate of the accuser. So this is like a really serious case. It's life or death for both parties, it seems like, right?
Right, and that's consistent with the crime of sorcery in the Hebrew Bible. The death sentence is going to be so yeah, a very serious thing, but also something that's hard to prove. So you can see why they bring it to the ordeal.
It certainly would be difficult to prove. Um, but we'll get into why
Yeah.
the river ordeal is good for this in a minute. The other reference in the Law Code of Hammurabi 132 says if the finger was pointed at the wife, and you'll recognize this one from the Bible, pointed at the wife
Mhm.
of a signor because of another man, but she has not been caught while lying with the other man, she shall submit to the water ordeal, the river as divine judge for the sake of her husband. And there's some people who have read the Bible that there's alarm bells going off at this point, and there should be. You should recognize this. Another classic law source is the Middle Assyrian law codes. These come after the Babylonian law codes and after the Hammurabi law codes. But they're quite similar. Law 17 says, if a signor has said to another signor, people have lain repeatedly with your wife, since there were no witnesses, they shall make an agreement and go to the river for the water ordeal. And so, again, we find it seems to be a common with like, hey, I think my spouse, did some stuff, but I can't prove it. And Law Code
Right.
22, if the signor's wife has declared, he did lie with me, when the man has paid the damages to the signor, the wife shall go to the river, although he had no such agreement. If he has turned back from the river, they shall treat him as the woman's husband and treat his wife. And then another one in the same vein from 24. Notice these are kind of a collection of laws around infidelity. And so Law 24 says, however, if he has signed it by declaring it, I did not know it, they shall go to the river for the water ordeal. So it seems like if you have a crime that you can't solve, there might not have been witnesses, there's no evidence, the river is in fact your method for solving it. We find something similar in the palace purity laws from around the beginning of the Iron Age. It says, when someday the king's anger is aroused, and I, the king, summon you, all the kitchen personnel, and hand you over to the river for an ordeal, Whoever will be proven innocent will remain the king's servant. The king said, let Zolias go to the river. If he proves innocent, let him clean himself. And you can see how some of these, like I said, are a little bit redundant, which is why I limited it to 8 sources. But I wanted to illustrate that, like, this is a really common practice in the ancient Near East. So we shouldn't be surprised at all that it shows up in the Bible. One of the oldest law codes from ancient Mesopotamia, from Sumerian, the Ur-Nammu law codes, even prior to the Hammurabi law code, says in 524, if a man has accused a man of, and unfortunately we don't know what he was accused of, and he, the accuser, had him brought to the river ordeal, and the river ordeal proved him innocent, then the man who brought him must pay him 3 shekels of silver. So this is interesting because in ancient Sumer, if the accuser is wrong and the man proves to be innocent, he doesn't get executed. He's got to pay a fine. It says if a man accused the wife of a man of fornication and the river proved her innocent, then the man who had accused her must pay 1/3 of a mina of silver. So again, the false accusation or the wrong accusation doesn't result in death in the Ur-Nammu law code. And you guys have probably heard of the righteous sufferer, or so-called the Babylonian Job. It's a very popular text from the 18th century. But it's similar to the book of Job, which is really interesting for what we're doing here, because we're going to find the book of Job mentions the river ordeal. But in this particular poem, when the righteous sufferer is basically pleading to his god Marduk and making his case before Marduk, he makes a reference to the river ordeal, although it's a metaphor. So it says, he pulled me from the river, he took my hand, he who smote me, he's referred to Marduk. Marduk, he restored me, he smote the hand of my smiter. It was Marduk who made him drop his weapon, and he attacked the attack of my foe. It was Marduk who, and then unfortunately the text is fragmentary for a moment, but it continues. It says, at the place of the river ordeal where people's fates are decided, I was struck in the forehead, so on and so forth. So the river ordeal is the place where, like, the judgment of the gods come in when human beings lack the ability to make a judgment. Another ancient Sumerian version of this, from the hymn of Nanshi, says, no one shall superimpose anything upon it. Superimposing will not enter the house of Nancy. So she's talking, the hymn writer here is referring to people that are engaging in some fakery, but that's not important right now. When people do this, it says the ordeal river in the house of Nancy clears a person after the decision has emerged from the holy song, the word of Absu. So it's interesting here, they name the deity that is in charge of the river in this particular source, which is, we don't always get that. A lot of times it's kind of
Yeah.
assumed who's in charge of the river. You have to guess based on who's writing. But this is really cool because they name it. And then we have a letter from King Sin Idinam to Nin Isina that mentions much of the same. This is pretty old too. This is from the old Babylonian period. It says, I perform prayers and sacrifices. I have withheld nothing from them. But Ashur-lui, this is the name of a deity, spends time with the king of Babylon, the son of Ilarugu, the river ordeal with, and then it breaks up. It says, their city against my city daily overruns the land. Their king seeks out the king of Larsa as an evildoer. This is just a really interesting mention here because, again, we have another deity that's mentioned that seems to be in charge of the river ordeal. And this is important because not every river was like governed by the same deity. It kind of depended on where you were from, what deity and time period you were dealing with. And so obviously in the Bible, it's either Elohim or Yahweh. But this is one of our last sources. This is the sacred marriage rites to Inanna. This is like a New Year festival that went down in Babylon and Sumer. It says, in the palace, the house that advises the country and is a restraining yoke on all foreign lands, the house that is the river ordeal of the dark-headed people, the nation in its entirety, a dais has been founded for Ninagala. The king, being a god, will sojourn with her on it. So it's really interesting that, again, we have another deity, in this case Inanna, that is associated with the river ordeal. So again, it depending on where you are, what time period you're from, is going to be a different deity that's in charge. And then I'll just mention this
Mm.
one interesting linguistic connection that, and then I'm going to hand things over to Chet because Chet's got some really fun stuff to go over. There's a really interesting linguistic connection. Wa'id, or just aid in Hebrew, has an Akkadian cognate, which typically refers to like a cosmic river or a divine river. And it gets mentioned in Genesis 2:6 and in Job 36:27, which is, again, very striking because we see both in Genesis and in Job, we see language that is very reminiscent of Babylonian, like cosmic water situations. And that's all I'll say about that because I think Chet's going to cover some of that with what he dug up. But Chet, tell us what you learned, and we have lots of Bible verses to go over during this presentation. Now that we kind of got the groundwork laid about what the river ordeal is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You sent me a reference to a little historiola that talks about the cosmic river that I thought was really interesting. I don't know if you remember. It was from Driver, maybe Driver's collection, but I thought it was really interesting because if you look at the Akkadian there, there's a lot of mythological references. Apsu, for example, is mentioned, which is, if you read like your Enuma Elish, this is one of the deities that is involved in birthing the gods. And so you have lots of cosmic symbolism there. The river is called a judge in this, and so there seems to be some of this idea of the river being able to determine innocence or guilt. There's also seems to be associated with Abu, which is the flood. If you read like Atrahasis, for example, right? So like there's kind of all these interesting mythical ideas. I don't want to talk chronologically about whether or not the myth is inspiring the ritual, or if the myth is kind of being tacked on later, because it sort of doesn't matter. And definitely by the time we get to the Hebrew Bible, it's going to be a very a lot of mythology and cosmic symbolism is going to be associated with this ritual, especially because it probably wasn't being practiced in ancient Canaan. As far as I've been able to find. So, anyways, yeah, let's go into the text of the Bible, and um, you know, I would actually like to start in. We can start actually in Genesis 1, verse 1, into verse 2. Well, mostly verse 2.
We do have to beg for your patience from the audience today. I don't know why, but Bible Gateway is having some server issues today, and it takes a little bit to load the verses. We might switch to, maybe if you do Bible Hub for this, but either way, it is loading. It's kind of slow today.
Yeah, well, we're getting there. All right, so we have Genesis 1, and so this is, obviously most people know the creation story. God is speaking creation into existence, but before any of that, you have the cosmic ocean, right? And you have these interesting terms being used in concepts, and yeah, the big one that we're going to focus on is the deep, right? This is the Hebrew term there is tehom. Um, and this is related to the Akkadian. Ah, yes, very good, very good. This is related to a term that we have in Akkadian, which is tiamtu, or Tiamat. It's usually translated or transliterated. Um, it sounds similar. We're not just playing sound games here. We can account pretty much for every development. There's a science to it. The intervocalic H drops in the Akkadian. You have Canaanite shift going on in Hebrew, so your ah goes to an o. It's all pretty straightforward. Now, this does come to be a pretty generic noun in the Hebrew Bible. But again, it's just worth noting because the Hebrew Bible does have a lot of myth and cosmic myth references, and this may be one, because it's the waters of Apsu and Tiamat that you'll see in Enuma Elish bring forth the gods, so that they have creative power. And in fact, if you go down to verse 20 in Genesis chapter 1, It actually has the waters bringing forth living creatures.
Mm-hmm.
This is, of course, at the command of Yahweh, but again, like it's a again just maybe a subtle callback because the creative power of water is a mythic theme. Um, Now, yeah, the idea of the cosmic river, the aid, is really interesting, and it may be even more interesting than Justin's leading on here because we have a term for calamity that is used several times in the Hebrew Bible. And the only difference in spelling is that you have a yod, which is it's just a mater, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
it. What it really is just indicating that you have that E class vowel there. Prior to the medieval time when the Masoretes, and but we'll get to that a little bit down the road. Cosmic river imagery you're also going to have in Ezekiel when it describes the future temple.
Yeah.
If you want to bring up Ezekiel 47:1, you're going to get this. And again, associating it with the temple, the mountain of God. Again, all this kind of,
So
cosmic idea.
that is important for those who aren't familiar with cosmic mountain imagery, it goes hand in hand with cosmic rivers, like these divine
Yes.
sources that outflow into our particular world. Like it's a connecting point between the abode of the gods and the abode of mankind. And one of the ways that they connect is through the mountain. That's why like the ancient ziggurats sometimes were named like the stairway from heaven and earth because they were like mini man-made mountains, or they would say the gateway between heaven and earth. And that's why the deities often lived on the mountaintops, because deities lived in the sky and we lived down here. But the mountain connected the two realms and also did the river, because as we'll find out, a lot of these cosmic rivers have mountain sources, meaning there's a deity controlling them.
Yeah, and it might be worth pointing out that in Akkadian, the term it's Hershanu. This is a term that can refer to the mountains. It can also refer specifically to ordeal by water, and so the connection linguistically is very direct. And again, like we're going to see this a little more as we get into the particulars of the Hebrew Bible. But if you want to turn to even like Genesis 7, where we have the flood. I don't know, maybe like verses 11 through 12. And we can just look at the English. It might be easier for people to follow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the 600th year of Noah's life in the second month on the 17th day of the month, not day, the fountains of the great Tehom. All right, that's the deep. So again, in the same way that in the Mesopotamian literature, we have connections between the cosmic waters that bring about the gods. In the Hebrew Bible, we have cosmic waters. They bring about things, not necessarily gods. In Akkadian, they are associated with the flood. In the Hebrew Bible, again, you see somewhat of a flood association. And so um, and I guess I'll just step back real quick because we have been throwing around this idea of cosmic imagery. There's this kind of idealized past that goes on in ancient literature where you have like, it's almost like archetypes. I feel like it's like pre-archetype language, before the Greeks were talking about that kind of thing, right? It's like there's this ideal state and ideal versions of things. There's the cosmic mountain, there's the cosmic river, and it's just kind of it's like a form, that all of the other, the real rivers that we encounter in the world are participating in. That may not be totally appropriate language, but I think it helps kind of get at the idea of what's going on. And so, yeah, the idea that there's this mountain that God meets with humanity, this connecting point between heaven and earth, and then you have, like in the Genesis narrative, we have this beautiful garden. You have this river flowing out of it that provides life. And again, the aid, that term, again, is borrowed from Akkadian id, as far as, I think most scholars generally agree with this, that's calling back this idea. So, having all that background, what I would like to do now is revisit the Hammurabi law. And I wonder if by chance I know we didn't really talk about this before, but would you by chance have section 131
I
as
can get
well?
it.
Yeah, bring up 131 and 132.
Oop, if I can type, there we go. There we go. There's 131. Okay.
Okay, so we have two laws here dealing with the problem of a woman not being faithful to her husband. And this is a pretty big issue in the ancient world, right? You don't have paternity tests, so the fears of paternity fraud are a big deal. And this is something that's very hard to prove. And so they want to have a way of doing this. And there's two kinds of cases that come up, and there are two different ways that these are dealt with. And the first case is if a man brings a charge against one's wife, but she is not did I say surprised? You got a different translation than me.
Yeah, the Avalon Project has their own unique translation.
Well, I'll read mine real quick. It makes a
Mhm.
little more sense to me. But it's if a man accuse his wife and she has not been taken in line with another man, she shall take an oath in the name of God, and she shall return to her house. Okay, so it's just this is just between a man and his wife, right? He's suspicious. He's a little jealous. He's going, I think maybe you've been. And so what he does is he all she has to do is take an oath to God, and it's like, well, okay, you took the oath. God didn't like strike her down or anything. That was considered good enough, right? But then in 132 we have if the finger is pointed. So this is more public, right? This brings shame to the man, and so sorry, I'll look up mine real quick. Because of another man, and she has not been taken in line with another man. For her husband's sake, she shall throw herself into the river. Right. And so this saves her husband's reputation. All right, stop the rumors. Look, she jumped in, she floated. Everything's good. All right. So now this is a time to look at the similar law in the Hebrew Bible because there's some interesting textual problems with what we have going on. This is in Numbers chapter 5. It's the ordeal of the accused adulteress. And we'll start out just reading verses 12 through 14. Okay, so, and I'll look on the screen. It says, Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if any man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him, if a man has had intercourse with her, but it is hidden from her husband, so that she is undetected, though she has defiled herself, and there is no witness against her, since she was not caught in the act. If a spirit of jealousy comes on him, and he is jealous of his wife who has defiled herself, or if a spirit of jealousy comes on him, and he is jealous of his wife, though she has not defiled herself, then the man shall, and then it goes on to explain the ritual. But it's interesting. This is incredibly convoluted. We have, 12 through 14. Like, that's a lot of words to say the guy suspects his wife is cheating on him, right? And so, what some scholars would suggest is that this is actually a combination of two laws. So, originally in ancient Israel, you would have had something more similar to what's going on in Hammurabi. And so, when you read, say, starting in verse 12, if any man's wife goes astray, is unfaithful to him, had intercourse with her, it's hidden from the husband, she's undetected, she has defiled herself, no witnesses against her. The argument would be that what we have there is that would be the public accusation, right? And when you get to the spirit of jealousy, that this would have been a separate law concerning the private, right? And so then, in the same way as we have in Hammurabi, you'd have the oath for the one case, and then you'd have the ordeal for the public case. And for whatever reason, these have been combined. And
We'll see a lot of it
evidence
in the
for
Hebrew
it,
Bible, multiple
you do, yeah,
strata just being smushed together.
right. And now we do have to be careful with this type of analysis, right? Because just because there's repetition doesn't mean we have you know, two strata or something being
Hmm.
combined, especially when you're looking at like priestly literature, you get gobs of repetition. Things are very redundant, but of course, a lot of it's legal, so you want to be clear. Um, the priestly writers were really interested in that, so we have to be careful. But there's some. It's when the repetitions sort of begin conflicting with each other that we start wanting to maybe think about some heavy redaction going on. And when you go to verses 16 through 18, we have something a little puzzling, right? So we have the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord. Okay, so she's sitting before the Lord. Then the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, take some of the dust that is on the floor in the tabernacle and put it into the water, right?
Sure, it tastes
And then,
delicious.
yeah, oh, I'm sure, yeah. And then in 18, we read, the priest shall set the woman before the face of, wait a second. Where was the woman in verse 16? She's
She's
already
before the
sitting in
Lord.
front of she's already before, like, while he was making the water, did she try to escape or something? Like, no, 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 get back. No, that's not what's going on, right? Again, we probably have two different laws here. And another case of this, I just want to be really clear that we're not, making up that, we have different sources at play. Uh, and I actually don't have this one written down, but just scroll down a little ways and maybe I can
Hmm.
find it. Yeah. It should be, yeah, 20. Yeah, okay. Um, Actually up just a little bit, right where he makes her say the oath. Yeah, okay. So in 19, then the priest shall make her take an oath, saying, if no man has lain with you, if you have not turned aside to uncleanness while you are under your husband's authority, be immune to this water of bitterness that brings the curse. But you have gone astray, etc. And we go down to 21. This is right after he gives the oath. And he says, let the priest make the woman take an oath of the curse. Oh, wait, we're already in the middle of making an oath, So it's a very confusing. And so I think a good case can be made that originally you had something more akin to what's going on in Hammurabi, and for whatever reason, these two laws either, a later scribe kind of saw them and was like, well, this is a contradiction. One law is saying there's an oath, the other is saying there's an ordeal, and it seems like it's basically the same crime. How do we deal with this? I mean, we can speculate all we want, but I think there's pretty good textual evidence, and I think that the existence of something like the Code of Hammurabi is probably evidence in favor of seeing this as maybe having originally been two separate laws, and they just kind of squished them together into one. And it's been, I mean, scholars have tried to, pick these apart and kind of say like this one goes to that, this one goes to the other one. These ones were added kind of as bridges or something. We probably will never be able to reconstruct it perfectly, but I think you can make a good case that something of that sort is going on. Um, is there any other connections you wanted to make regarding this with the
Not on
Assyrian?
Numbers
Yeah,
5. I think Numbers 5 is the most obvious connection in the Hebrew Bible to
right,
the water ordeal, even though they're not thrown in the water. I think most
right.
people know this one and would see the connection. There are definitely others that we should cover.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess just to kind of tie the knot on this one, just for anyone who doesn't know what the ordeal is, she drinks the water, she makes the oath, and then um, something happens. People debate what exactly it is about the uterus dropping and the womb discharge, and apparently it makes her to where she's infertile or something of this sort. Seems to kind of be implied in the text. This is interesting to think about in light of the discussion we had previously, though, about the relationship between ordeal and punishment, right? Because in this case, the ordeal is not just identifying guilt, as it would be, if hypothetically in a case where someone jumps into the water and they pull them out, if that's what's going on, and then they get the judgment. In this case, it's pretty clear that it's the water causes the curse, as far as I can tell. I mean, unless there's a different reading of that. So,
Mm.
yeah, but you can see again, it's one of these cases where it's something that is difficult to determine by regular human means, and so they resort to ordeal. And yeah, as far as I'm Well, I mean, as far as anyone's aware, this is really the only clear legal case of an ordeal, being ordained like in the Levitical law specifically.
Being commanded, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that being said, we can move on to some more of the mythological things going on. Go to the book of Jonah for me,
Yeah.
chapter 2. And for anyone, not familiar for some reason with what's going on in the book of Jonah, you have this kind of a narrative. It's not a prophet in the traditional sense of written prophets, where you have just a collection of oracles. This is actually a story about a prophet, and the prophet runs away from his prophetic calling. And if you know anything about prophets, this is the most understandable response to being called as a prophet in the world. There's nothing a prophet wants more than to not be a prophet. It's not a great job. So anyway, so he runs, right, and there's a casting of lots because he's at sea in with the Phoenicians, I believe. He's trying to get as far away from Nineveh as he can, pretty much. He gets thrown overboard because he says, "Hey, you know what? I'm guilty. This is why the sea is doing this. I'm running away from God." And so he gets thrown into the sea, and then we have this in chapter 2. And you could just scroll up just a little bit so I can
Hmm.
see the yeah. So we have, then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish. Okay, so at this point, according to the narrator, Jonah is in the belly of a fish, and he's saying, "I called to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol, that's the underworld, I cried, and you heard my voice." Now, the first thing you'll notice is all these verbs are past tense, which is a little weird, right? He's currently in the situation, right? And so he's using all these past tense verbs. You cast me into the deep sea, into the heart of the sea, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Now, Justin, could you guess, based on the English word there, the flood, what the Hebrew word is? You
Well,
can't,
I, I'd have to look it
unless you
up,
know it.
but um, I don't actually know it off the top of my head.
Would you bring up the Hebrew?
Yeah.
I guess. I thought it was something maybe like Mabul. I was wrong.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Na'ar. I did not expect
that
Na'ar
no,
or
because
Nahar.
that's not what it means. A river. It says the
Well,
river surrounded me.
I would expect Har. I don't know what the noon
No,
is
not
doing there.
well. It's Nahar River,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
like Nahum.
Hmm. Hmm. So stream. So interesting. So in the story of Jonah, we have a really interesting translation from the NRSV. Says the flood surrounded me. I assume
Hmm.
this is similar to wording what we find in Isaiah chapter 8 with the floodwaters reaching up to the neck. I've looked that one up before, and I remember the same verbiage, the floodwater actually being a flooding river. And I'm I'm
Hmm.
I'm curious if they understood the connection in Jonah to the river ordeal, if they would have translated it more appropriately to like a flooding river, or the flooding river surrounded me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe something like that. But I mean, this is your standard Hebrew word for a river. I mean, even in
Yeah.
Narum in Akkadian, like, this is a very typical word for a river. My imagination tells me that when you're translating this and you see it in the context of Jonah, the river doesn't really make any sense, right?
Mm-mm.
But of course, again, you have these past tense verbs. This was not composed by Jonah sitting in the belly of a fish, quite clearly.
He
Not,
wasn't
not,
down there
not
with a legal pad just jotting down the lament.
if if in some hypothetical world Jonah was real and he was sitting in the belly of a fish, reciting this, he'd heard it somewhere else, right? That's
Mm.
this is not, he's not making, because it just doesn't fit well. If we yeah, we can keep going down, but he calls out, maybe it specifically go down to the very end. because I think this is what makes it really clear.
Verse
Oh yeah,
7
no,
is very clear.
yeah,
We've got the
yeah,
deep showing up as well. And then in verse 7, let's see, what was that the one I was thinking of?
yeah. No, I skipped it. If you go up, I skipped an important part. We have the
Oh, verse 6
mountains.
was what I was thinking of. Yes.
Yes, yes. At the roots of the mountains, I went down to the land that's Eretz, which typically refers to the underworld. I think in this context, it's very clearly referring to the underworld. We just had a reference to Sheol, right, which is the underworld. Yeah, the bars close on me forever. You brought up my life from the pit, oh Lord my God. Yeah, yeah. So we're getting that cosmic imagery associated with the sinking into the river.
And
But yeah.
this is a connection I don't think most people see when they're reading this, but when it talks about the roots of the mountain, we have to remember that the mountain again doesn't just connect heaven and earth, it also connects heaven, earth, and Sheol. So the
Hmm.
idea was that the caverns at the base of many mountains would descend all the way into Sheol. That's one of the reasons, other than convenience, that so many people were buried in mountain caves. But
Right.
also, it was often believed that evil entities from Sheol or entities from Sheol could descend via the mountain caverns. And so we have this really interesting imagery. If we combine the mountain and the river ordeal, all into a united concept, we have a divine river coming from the top of the cosmic mountain where the deity is, and it goes all the way down to earth through the mountain and then eventually all the way down into Sheol, which is your place of judgment. If you lose the river ordeal, you go into Sheol. You're done. You're toast. So it's a real
Yeah.
unified concept.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah. And I think, like when I read this, and especially after looking at the Hebrew, I have no doubt in my mind that, this is a psalm, that was based on, some mythical imagery around these river ordeals. And, in the story of Jonah, it kind of looked like it fit. There's references to water, whatever. But yeah, I mean, if you go down to the very end, looking at the very last verse, I think it's really clear that this is something that's inserted after the fact, right? The voice of thanksgiving, our sacrifice, deliverance belongs to the Lord. Right. So, this seems, again, it seems as if he's saying this after the fact.
Yeah.
And then we, of course, we resume back into our narrative. Um,
It's maybe important to mention there's like a couple like standard elements in a river ordeal.
mhm.
We've covered some of them already. Like the first is like you're accused. The second is that
Mm.
you're thrown into the river by your adversary. The third is that you cry out to your deity, and the fourth is that your deity either kills you or revives you from the river. You know, those are kind of the
Yeah.
steps. And we'll find these if you know those four steps. You'll find these steps all over the Bible. Like in the Jonah story, it's just obvious. It's right there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and when I looked at the Hebrew and saw that it had the word for river, that blew my mind. I did not expect the word flood to be translating river. But
I
again,
wouldn't have guessed that either. In fact, my brain was even functioning when we first looked it up in Hebrew. I was looking at har like mountain, and I was like, wait a minute. Until you said
yeah, yeah,
river,
yeah.
I'm like, oh shoot, I've forgotten Nahar is river.
Right. So, yeah, so and you and I have talked a bit about like the Davidic Psalms and things like this.
Mm,
We Psalm 18, I think, might be the clearest example that I've at least
yeah,
located in the book of Psalms that
agreed.
seems to be using kind of this cosmic river ordeal language. So, maybe we
Which
can go there next.
shows up in 2 Samuel 22. It's repeated in David's not yeah David's
Yes,
psalm in
that's
Second
right. That's
Samuel.
right.
Oh, I typed 19. Oops. I'll try this again. But it's almost identical. Psalm 19 and 2 Samuel 22. If you read one, you've kind of read the other. But yeah,
Yeah.
let's grab this one.
Yeah, so we can start maybe in verse 4 when we have praising
Hmm.
God kind of at the beginning of the thing, and then we have The cords of death encompassed me, the torrents of perdition assailed me, the
Mm.
cords of Sheol entangled me, the snares of death confronted me. Very similar to what we have in Jonah, by the way. A lot of the vocabulary is going to overlap. So what's been inserted into Jonah, could very well have been, found in the book of Psalms. In fact, in my JPS study Bible, it shows like several psalms in the Hebrew Bible where Jonah's language seems to be reflecting, and suggests that it's kind of actually just amalgamating a bunch of things from different psalms, which is an interesting possibility. Um, so yeah, let's go down to verse 15 through 18. I think is going to highlight the imagery really well
Oh
here.
yeah.
Yeah, then the channels of the sea were seen, and the foundations of the world were laid bare at your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils. He reached down from on high. He took me. He drew me out of the mighty waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy and from those who hated me, for those were too mighty for me. Sorry, for they were too mighty for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity. Oh, and by the way, the Hebrew word for calamity there is aid
Oh,
with a yod, with a yod. And
fantastic. They should just
it,
translate it cosmic river ordeal.
the day of my ordeal, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
I mean, the phrase the phrase can't just mean the day of my river ordeal because it's used in broader context. I am sort of entertaining the theory, though, that that the sense of calamity might originate from the river ordeal.
Mm.
Because again, we see it in places like this where you have reference to the river ordeal. There's kind of interesting reference in Deuteronomy that would maybe be too complicated for this discussion. But I mean, again, the only difference is orthography. You know what I mean? That's the
Yeah.
only they insert the yod. That has nothing to do with the root. It does, and the Arabic connection that's been suggested for a while is not good. It's very difficult to maintain. Like sometimes when you're reading your lexicon and it'll say, well, this Arabic word can mean this. It's always good to go to an Arabic lexicon and look at it because usually the meaning is so remote from the original sense that there's no way it came into the classical Hebrew. You know what I mean? So yeah, I kind of put this in that category. So anyways, just interesting side note. Probably more work needs to be done on that, but it does say the day of my aid. But the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a broad place, delivered me because he delighted in me. And I think really important about this particular psalm is if you go to verse 24, and look at the language used there. And again, thinking about what a river
Yeah.
ordeal is, what happens when you come out? You're determined blameless. You're
Yep.
proclaimed innocent. And so, look what we have here. Um, uh,
20.
you go up to we can start in 20.
Yeah.
Start in 20. Yeah. Yeah. So the Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands. He recompensed me, for I have kept the ways of the Lord, and I have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his ordinances were before me, and his statutes I did not put away from me. I was blameless before him. I kept myself from guilt. Therefore, the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands in his sight. Again, so like you have like basically, all the steps of a river ordeal. You're
Yeah.
sinking, you're brought out, you're saved, and then, you declare your innocence. It's really incredible.
It's striking too, like the reference of like Yahweh reaching down in to rescue him out of the waters. When we compare that
Yeah.
to the poem of the righteous sufferer, or the Babylonian Job, where it talks about his god Marduk drawing him out of the waters.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good, and that's one that I hadn't caught. I'm glad you brought that up. That does tie it in, I think, really well. Yeah. So I guess there's one other passage I've been playing around with, and as far as I know, I'm the first to catch this. But in Proverbs 25, there's something that kind of interesting that maybe reflects a river ordeal. I kind of want to run this by maybe Justin, just as I really just came up with this like a good day or so ago as I was looking into it. But it's Proverbs 25 verse 26.
Yeah, Bible Gateway's trying to catch up. There we go. 25 and
We're good.
26.
Yeah, okay. So this translation says, like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain are the righteous who give way before the wicked. Can you bring up the Hebrew? I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to you're gonna have to give my own translation to make the connection because it doesn't say like anywhere. It's not a simile
Yeah.
necessarily.
And even in the King James, they indicate that it's being supplied. But yeah, there's no
Right, right. So they're assuming that so that you're reading tzaddik mot lifnei. Oh, sorry, I'm. These can't lifnei rasha. Maybe they're parsed. I'm remembering the verb being no that's right yeah, so a righteous man who falls before the wicked, and then they're saying okay, and then we have this something about bad springs and bad wells. This must be comparing the two, so we say it's like it, right? But I mean, if you
mm,
just translate it, a spring trampled, some the term isn't used very often in the Hebrew Bible, only a couple times, always with relation to water and always with like feet. So, like a trampled spring and then a well polluted. Now, this is interesting, mashchat, because in when we were looking at Jonah, the term for pit is shachat.
interesting.
And so, in fact, some translations actually translate that corrupted instead of the pit, or from the pit.
Yeah, I've seen that before, doing the pit and corruption, either translation from Shakath.
Right,
Or
right. Yeah.
sometimes
So
defile. I've seen it translated as defile.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, just one at least little linguistic connection back to something that we're connecting with the river ordeal here. But then it says the righteous falls before the wicked. And I mean, what does that mean? I mean, if
Mm.
we're thinking about water, you know, I mean, is this kind of some fun metaphor of like, hey, if the righteous person sinks before the wicked one, you, you're in a bad river, like the water's bad, right?
It's murky water, yeah. It's a bad
Yeah,
spring.
yeah, yeah. You got a bad one. So
That's
I mean,
actually
I
a
don't,
really good point.
I mean, we don't have like explicit reference to a river or anything, so I don't want to do too much with it, but it just really caught my attention, and I thought it was maybe would be a fun connection.
That certainly could be a connection. There are just a couple more that are maybe worth mentioning.
Yeah.
I knew you would cover a lot of the ones that I was going to bring up, like Psalm 18. There was one connection in Psalm 32:6 where it says, "Wherefore let every righteous man offer prayer to you in his time of going forth without cause to the overflowing of the many waters. They shall
Mm.
not overcome him," meaning the water shall not overcome
Mm.
him. I'm
Yeah.
seeing Psalm 32:6 as a reference to the righteous man surviving the river ordeal. Otherwise, there's no good reason to include the statement about him being righteous. What does that have to do with floodwaters? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's a good one.
if he's just out to sea, like what's that got to do with him being righteous?
Right.
And then we talked about the bridge between heaven and Sheol. And we talked about Jonah. Psalm 69 was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It says, "Deliver me from the mire. Let me not sink. Let me be rescued from those who hate me and from the depths of the sea. Let not the flood waters sweep over me. Let not the deep swallow me. Let not the pit close its mouth over me." It's hard to tell in Psalm 69 if you just read this passage if it's referring to the river ordeal or not, but it certainly could be. I saw some scholars positing that this was in fact about the river ordeal, but I don't know if the connection mm, is as clean as we might want it to be. But there certainly is a connection here with like the floodwaters and also the pit, Sheol. And it's hard when you
Yeah.
see those connections to not think about the river ordeal, being that, in the ancient Near East, there was definitely a connection between the river ordeal and, going down to Sheol. Um,
Right.
But the beginning of the, if you read the whole psalm rather than in snippets, it certainly gives you the impression that it's a river ordeal. It says, "Save me, O God," right? "Save me, for the waters have come up to my neck.
Mhm.
I sink in deep mire. There's no foothold. I have come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me." And so the whole thing, like the whole psalm, really feels like he's tapping into this river ordeal type of metaphor. Um, and then he prays. So just like the other steps, he's in the water. He prays out to God. God faithfully rescues him from the floodwaters sweeping over him. So he gets his redemption from God. So there certainly could be a connection here. Again, I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk, but there is a reference to guilt and non-guilt as well in the psalm. So it's definitely something to consider for Psalm 69. And then I think that was one of the only other ones that I had listed. There are others if you read through the Psalms for the river ordeal. Some of the other psalms that I wrote down was Psalm 66, Psalm 88, Psalm 124, Psalm 141. All of them seem to be echoing this idea of the floodwaters have overcome me, yet you will rescue me from the waters and and vindicate me. And so those references might be worth looking at as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I think if maybe we can tie this into the New Testament a little bit, because I do think it's interesting that the writer of Matthew, then again, we're probably not going to get any direct ties to the river ordeal, but the way that some of this imagery gets pushed, pushed into later theology in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus seems to be aware of Jonah 2 and uses this as, kind of symbolic for his death and resurrection. If you go to like Matthew 12, the verses will be like 38 through 40. We can see, I think very clearly he's using imagery specific to Jonah
Mm.
2. Like without that psalm inserted there, he wouldn't be making this connection with, the underworld and the heart of the earth and like that kind of stuff. So it's
Yeah, that's a good point. So when they ask for the sign, it says,
yeah.
"An evil and adulterous generation asked for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so for 3 days and 3 nights the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth."
Hmm.
That's interesting. That's a fair point, especially if Jesus understood. It's hard to know how much mythology Jesus knew about, but if Jesus understood some of the mythology surrounding chapter 2 of Jonah, he certainly could be referring to his vindication over death by river, right? Proving to be righteous.
Yeah. Yeah.
That certainly could count as a possible illusion. Sometimes it's hard to to plant your flag and say this is an illusion or
Yeah.
something, but
Yeah,
that
no,
certainly
I
could
would, I
be.
wouldn't, I wouldn't see a river ordeal being at all in the mind of the author of Matthew. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see that these symbols that go back to the cosmic symbol of the river ordeal. Like the ripple effect of that goes all the way into the New Testament. I think that's something worth highlighting. It'd be really cool to do a study on
Yeah.
baptism and see how
Oh,
how that relates to river ordeals. That's it. Obviously, a project that's beyond the scope of my expertise because I stay in the Old Testament for the most part. But I,
that's
I
the
imagine there's
yeah.
something there.
That's a connection I never thought about, but you're right. Like the idea of baptism, and even in the New Testament, what does it say? It says the sign of baptism is you've died with Christ when you go into the water, and then you're raised to new life when you come out of the water. Very symbolic of this idea of the river ordeal, where you could go into the river, but if you come out, you've been vindicated by your deity, and you've been given life.
Yeah. mean, I think at the very least we could infer that there might be some cosmic symbolism there relating to the river and the mountain and, death to life and that kind of thing. I mean, certainly, well, we just made the connection from Jonah to Jesus. Certainly, Paul connected Jesus' death and resurrection to baptism. Probably an innovation, but still an interesting thing that he saw.
Yeah, for sure. And when you read the references to the supposed cosmic river, to the river ordeal, a lot of them really connect this idea of death with the river.
Yeah,
That's interesting. Well, I
yeah,
think
we're gonna have to do some work on that.
I did another follow up. Well, I think those were all the references I had listed for the river ordeal. There actually are more if you look through the Hebrew Bible, especially in the Psalms, because when you're like when you're struggling, I guess you might say, with something, and you're trying to depict your struggling, you're trying to find a good metaphor for your struggle. Of course, if you're in the ancient Near East, you're going to reach for the river ordeal. It just seems obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, I think it highlights struggle. It highlights wanting to you know be rescued from the struggle, be demonstrated to be innocent in front of your foes, the people who accuse you. Yeah, I think is a really powerful symbol of that, especially in the ancient land of Canaan, where water was such a bad cosmic symbol in a lot
Right.
of ways. It was a dark and dangerous place. Um, really, I mean, running out throughout the Bible, it's like the villain. It's you have like the monsters, and like this is in Psalm 74, right? When the Israelites, they're in their captivity, and they're asking God for rescue. What image do they use? They use Yahweh at the beginning of creation. Before he sets the stars, anything else in place, he gets the monsters, right? He defeats the sea monsters. It's always Yahweh against the sea, which of course is universal in the
Right.
ancient Near East, pretty much. You have Marduk, and you have the Baal fight against Yam and all of that.
Now
The,
certainly would be a good time to mention some of the more tangentially related stories that might be echoing the river ordeal. One of my favorites, and we talked about this before, is Jacob crossing the Jabbok
mm,
River before he meets his brother Esau. What's really interesting about the story is, remember, Jacob leaves and he's kind of he's not a good guy when he leaves. He has to leave to preserve his life. Like he's done something terrible, you know. He's tricked
mhm.
his brother twice out of his birthright and out of his blessing. And then he's gone for 20 plus years, and he has a family. He works for Laban. He seems like he repaired his image, and then eventually he wants to reunite with his brother. Now the interesting thing is the last thing that happens before he reunites with his brother is he has to cross that river. It's almost like the crossing of the river is the test for whether or not he is become the person that is needed.
Mm.
He has gotten rid of his old bad past and is now a righteous individual that is ready to make amends with his brother. And then what happens when they get to the river? Well, he has to wrestle with Yahweh at the river. Obviously the one in charge of all the rivers. And it seems to be, and there's other narratives too about individuals having to pass by like the river troll, as you've probably seen in
Yeah, yeah.
mythology books or in fairy tales and things like that. Similar concept where there is a divine agent that is in charge of this waterway, and before you can cross over it, you have to prove yourself to be of the right character, right?
Mm.
And so I think certainly the story of Jacob wrestling the angel could be counted among something like akin to a quasi river ordeal, if you might call it one. And then we see others like Joshua and his men crossing the river as well, or
Oh yeah.
the multiple heads of the Leviathan being smoted by Yahweh,
Mm.
and Rahab as well. But
Yeah, there's
yeah,
a massive vocabulary for like sea monsters in the Hebrew Bible. Um, and I almost wonder if you could connect some of the like the Exodus ideas about that with this, because there's certainly like mythological angles to that. Trying to think, there a place in Isaiah where like it's split into seven heads. Um,
That
Trying to
shows up
think.
in the Psalms. In fact,
Oh, is that it? Okay.
it might be Psalm 74 even. Let me check. Yeah, in Psalm 74, put it on the board. It says, "You divided the sea by your might." So there's a callback. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the dragons in the waters. You crushed the heads
Ah,
of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. And I would point out, interestingly enough, with the crossing of the Israelites, the innocent parties passed through the water, and the guilty parties were swallowed up into death by the
mhm.
waters.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
It's hard to not notice it. Now, again, sometimes you can notice things that aren't really there just because you're doing like parallelomania.
Right, right.
But it's hard not to notice it. Like once you know some of the patterns, it's hard not to read the pattern.
Yeah, and I think also when you see a lot of clear examples that there's an awareness of it, the more ambiguous ones become more plausible, you know.
Mm.
Oh, and by the way, I did find the passage I was looking for.
Oh yeah,
It's
what is it?
Isaiah 11:15.
You can do it, Bible Gateway. I believe in you. Yeah, I've never seen Bible Gateway do this before. It's just having a slow day. That the Lord will dry up the tongue of the sea of Egypt and will wave his hand over the river with his scorching wind and will split it into seven channels and make a way to cross on foot. Definitely a callback.
Yeah, so it's the seven channels is interesting given the seven-headed sea creature
Mm,
myth that you have. There I think some scholars suggest that it's kind of calling back to that idea.
yeah, that's a good point. It certainly could be. Um, yeah,
I mean,
that's an
you don't
interesting
have
one.
that going on in the Exodus narrative, at least not the one that we have.
No. And maybe the last thing we should mention on the topic is people might find the idea of the river ordeal to be strange because it feels like divination, even though
Yeah,
Numbers 5 is clearly some form of it. But
yeah.
divination in the Hebrew Bible is not really all that uncommon. Joseph has his own cup of divination. We find when he's in Egypt. Laban and his daughters have teraphim in Genesis, and then more so, God Himself commands the Israelites to cast lots on all sorts of occasions. The casting of lots is really no different than throwing somebody into the water and seeing if they survive, or um, you know, or doing tarot cards. I think one of the most recognizable situations where this comes up is in Numbers chapter 15. It doesn't explicitly say that they cast lots. There's other passages that makes it a little more obvious when you like combine the passages with number 15. But in Numbers 15, there's a I forgot an S. There we go. In Numbers 15, there's a guy that's found picking up sticks, and we don't
Yes.
like they don't know what to do with them for obvious reasons because the law of Moses didn't really point out if what he was doing was a violation of the Sabbath. It wasn't actually clear. So it says, when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and the whole congregation, and they put him under watch. In most translations, will say this says in custody, but it says under watch. Either one would be fine, because it was
Right.
not clear what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, "The man shall be put to death. The congregation shall stone him outside of the camp." Well, the reality is what Moses did is he brought this man before the Lord and he had the priest cast lots. And that's how you settled
Mm.
these disputes typically. There's a number of sections in the Bible that talk about going before the Lord to either swear an oath or to cast lots to make a determination. Like when the land is divided in the book of Joshua, a lot of times they cast lots to do it, remember?
Right. Now, so I've actually been thinking about this passage, and I would maybe interpret it differently
Mm-hmm.
than what you're saying here, because I think this actually highlights the need for divination, specifically because it didn't happen. You go to the next chapter and look at how this this was responded to, right? Um, they assembled together against Moses, verse 3, and Aaron, and said to them, "You have gone far enough, right? For all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" Right? So I think this is
Oh,
pretty clearly in response to you know, Moses is, so he talks face to face with God. He comes up with what it's supposed to be. Like, this guy's just like collecting sticks, and you stoned him because
right.
God told you. Okay, all right, Whereas I think that's kind of the situation that public, like jumping into the river and that sort of thing is supposed to solve. It's like, it isn't just me talking. Look, God decided. You know.
Yeah, that's a fair
So,
point. You
anyways,
certainly could
that's
read
sort
it
of my
that
take.
way.
Yeah, that's the way I read it, anyways.
And we do find in Exodus and elsewhere where it says that Moses went before the Lord to get judgments on cases for the Israelites.
Hmm.
Um, let me grab. I've got a document here. Let's see. I've got a document that I put together a long time ago about the casting of lots. Let me show you some of them. They're really striking. There's a lot of commands in the Hebrew Bible to do exactly what we would call the casting of lots, or even divination. And remember, one of the disciples was chosen via casting
Yeah,
of
that's right.
lots. So it certainly
So
is a
you can't
way.
say you
Mhm.
can't just say this an Old Testament times thing.
No, it's certainly not. And remember, even in Jonah, we were reading in Jonah, what do they do
Yeah,
to determine the guilt? They cast
they cast
lots.
lots.
Yeah, there's this idea of casting lots for basically allowing the Lord to decide who in fact is guilty. But let me grab. I put a couple of verses in here. I'm going to load them up. This is the last thing I'll say on the topic of divination. But to be sure, like the river ordeal is essentially a form of divination. It's basically magic, except that to these ancient people it wasn't magic because they believed that their gods are real. Like we call it magic today. Like divination is just kind of magic today, but to them it was real. Proverbs
Right.
16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but the decision is the Lord's alone." Which is interesting. This is the idea that you cast the lots, but the Lord determines how these lots will make the decisions for you, which should be obvious as we see throughout the Bible. In 1 Chronicles 24:5, they organized them by lot, all alike, for there were officers of the sanctuary and officers of God among the sons of Eleazar. And or the organization of the priests in 1 Chronicles 24 was done by casting of lots. And then
Yeah.
Jonah, as you mentioned, we had the sailors cast lots. And then there was one more passage that I was thinking of in Joshua. There we go.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Is that right? Joshua 18, 1 through 6 is what I wanted. Yeah. If it will load today. I just a minute ago I got a bad gateway error from Bible Gateway. They're under attack apparently. I don't know. Somebody's
Oh, no.
hacking the website or something. There we go. Like a bad gateway. Let's see if we come on, Bible Gateway. You can do it. I believe in you. All right, let me try. We got to try a different website. Bible Gateway's cooked, friends. They're done. Let's try Bible.com, see if that works. NLT. Oh, we don't want that. I'd rather take the New King James over that. It says, now the whole congregation of the children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh and set up a tabernacle of meeting there, and the land was subdued before them. But There remained among the children of Israel 7 tribes which had not yet received their inheritance. Then Joshua said to the children of Israel, how long will you neglect to go and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers has given you? Pick out from among you 3 men from each tribe, and I will send them. They shall arise and go through the land, survey it, and according to their inheritance come back to me. They shall divide it into 7 parts. Judah shall remain in their territory on the south, and the house of Joseph shall remain there in their territory on the north. You shall therefore survey the land in 7 parts, and bring the survey to me, that I may cast lots for you before the Lord our God. So again, it's just a form of divination. Like when you can't figure out what to do, you don't have like the legal recourse to do things. You find alternative methods for allowing the Lord to decide. You cast lots, you throw people in rivers, give them magic potions to drink.
I mean, there's a sense in which we kind of do this sometimes. If there's a decision to be made and there's no clear right answer, people, we still pick straws sometimes and figure out, all right, hey, it's fair. Fate
Right,
decided.
right.
Even if you don't associate it with a particular deity, um, we don't run our legal system that way. I hope, but
Mm.
lower stakes. Sometimes that's how we do it.
But it does bring up a good question, chat. And this last thing I'll say, and then I'll read our. We got a couple super chats. I don't think we have any questions. If you want to throw some questions in the supers, friends, you're welcome to. But what do you think about this? So, there are Christians who do, we'll say, tarot cards. Is
Mm.
there anything really wrong with tarot cards if you get like a Christian deck of tarot cards? Like if you get ones that aren't like of the new age variety, and you say, well, the Lord is going to decide what cards come up, and then I can interpret them thusly. Or even if a Christian wants to cast lots to make decisions, is there anything wrong with casting lots today and just allowing the Lord to make the decision for you? Like I can't see how that would be a sin.
No, I mean, yeah, that seems perfectly consistent with the, you know, with what the text of the Bible says. I mean, unless you have some kind of church authority that's condemning it, then I guess you have that problem. But I mean, the Bible isn't univocal about everything. That lots are a valid way of seeking, knowledge from the divine. Pretty consistent on that one.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, friends, we just got a couple of supers. We really appreciate that. JM, good to see you tonight. Thank you for the $2 super thumb, and
You got a
also
thumbs up.
a super thumb. And
Super up.
Euhemeris says Mandeanism very heavily draws upon water river metaphors. Baptism is a daily thing for them too. Yeah, and actually, now that Chet mentioned it, there's got to be a deep connection between like the river deities, the cosmic river, and maybe even the river ordeal and baptism. I would be shocked if there wasn't some kind of connection. Maybe we can look into that and see
Somebody
what we come
somebody
up
has
with.
got to do a dissertation on water ritual, just starting in like ancient Near East all the way up to the New Testament.
Right.
I bet there would be so many threads.
Actually, are you familiar with the mouth opening ceremony?
Oh, what, in Egypt?
Yeah.
Or I mean, not even exclusively in Egypt. This is where you like you ensole the idol or something.
Yeah, it existed in multiple ancient Near Eastern texts, but interestingly enough, in the mouth opening ceremony, they christen the the idol in a river. They always use running
Oh
water.
yeah, yeah.
So they basically bathe, or might even say baptize or submerge the idol in the water before it's purified enough to have the mouth opening and the god indwelling it, which is maybe another possible connection with cosmic rivers.
Yeah. Oh, I'm certain it is.
Anyways, Euheremis, thank you for that, and that's a really interesting connection. We have to look into baptism more now. And it's just me says still fighting stage for cancer. Doug, heal me. Well, Doug is rock hard for you, and it's just me. Listen, we're with you. If there's anything we can do, even if it's morals apart, let us know. Cancer's a bitch. We all hate it. Nobody likes it. Cancer got my dad, got a number of my friends. It's horrific. So our hearts are with you. It's just me. And Randy, holy
Yeah.
shit, Randy sent out 20 and then 20 and then 20 more Deconstruction Zone gifted memberships. Friends, this is one of the reasons why Deconstruction Zone is crushing the membership race with DZ debates, because Randy shows up and sends out 60 of them on a random Saturday night.
Yeah,
Thank
this
you
isn't even
so,
like a
so much.
normal streaming day.
No, it's not even a debate. Thank you, Randy, so much. I really appreciate that, friend. That's super generous. And remember, if you've got a membership, whether gifted or purchased, you get access to the Deconstruction cheat sheet. I think I added 2 more contradictions this week, and
Oh, nice.
be some new stuff getting on it. I'm reading through the Quran, so I keep adding stuff to the Quran tab. So I'm excited for the Quran tab to be updated some more. But Chet, any final words before we close out our stream? Any thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. First of all, of course, like thank you so much for having me on to do this. I love podcasting with you. It's
Buddy, it's a
it's good,
treat.
I think. Yeah, it's good to dig in, a little deeper and get to explore these things. We find this kind of fun. But yeah, I would say that, there are so many, big picture themes running throughout the Bible that you aren't going to detect unless you just read it.
Right.
Like so many people, I mean, look, so many of these passages, you can't recall them and bring them to your attention if you haven't read the Bible. If when you hear about the river ordeal and the only thing you think about is, the Soto ritual, um, you know, you just need to know more. And this is why we do it. Justin and I, we love this. This is kind of our hobby. And yeah, just pay attention to the big picture themes, follow them through, see where they manifest, ask questions. Yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you, Chet. And as we were you were talking there, Chet, we've got one piece of new information or news from our friend Josh. He's just bought
Ooh,
me an NRSV UE, $100 premium goat
ooh,
skin,
yeah.
gold trim, pages upgraded for my new King James. You're gonna love that
No
Bible, and I
way.
know exactly the one you're referring to. I almost bought it myself, but
Wow.
I rather than doing that, I had some spare leather from something else. I just made my own leather binding because my I had the paperback.
That dug on it.
Yeah, of course I put a sticker dug it. But like if you buy the cheap paperback Bible, like you can just go to Hobby Lobby and buy leather and stick it on there. Like just use some contact paper. You don't have to pay the $100 for the goat skin lined one. But if you got $100 for a Bible, that's the one you want right there, my friend. And then last one from Jay says, no vertical stream. This will not be forgotten. Well, we are on DZ debates, but we were showing content, and it's easier to show it on a horizontal stream because we can go back and forth and do presentations and whatnot with. So it's just easier that way. Chet and I did something on a vertical stream once a while back, and I remember it was difficult because every time we wanted to show something on screen, it was like covering both of us up. So
Mm,
I thought this would be
yeah.
easier. But guys, we love chat around here. We'll probably be getting together on more niche topics in the future because, like, if you love the Bible, if you love to nerd out over like history and like ancient Near Eastern stuff, you're in good keeping. Chet and I love this kind of stuff. So if you have ideas, if there's a topic you want to know about, let us know and we'll
Yeah.
get the wheels turning. So Chet, thank you so much for joining me today. I had an absolute blast, buddy.
Me too. I learned some things.